Hey there, welcome to this episode of the Cutting Room Floor. This is where we get to dig a little bit deeper into a recent message here at Sunny Slope. We get to go into some background details or some background information. And this month, we've been going through the book of Ruth. And last week, we looked at the story of Ruth in Ruth chapter 2, where Ruth actually goes to a field and she begins to glean in the fields of a man called Boaz. And one of the things we said is that actually this was all arranged by the providence of God, or the sovereign plan and purpose of God. What I didn't get a lot into is something that I wanted to maybe pick up now and just give a little explanation for, and then maybe just kind of offer some thoughts about how it might apply to us today. And that has to do with the laws of gleaning. One of the ways that God ensured the care for the vulnerable people in society, and in Israel's day, vulnerable people would have included widows and orphans, especially those who did not have a husband to take care of them, those who didn't have parents to take care of them, or those who didn't have a spouse or children who could then kind of help take care of them into their age. Those would be the vulnerable people in society, of which Ruth, of course, was one. Ruth was very vulnerable in at least two ways. She was an outsider, but she was also a woman, and she was unmarried, and she didn't have anyone close to her to sort of take care of her. So one of the things that Ruth does is she goes to this field and she begins to gather grain in that field. And that seems like maybe a little bit of a strange practice, like you're going into a complete foreigner's field to gather grain. But there's a little more sense to this than you might imagine at first. And I want to show you what I mean by that. I'm going to just pull up my screen here. And I've got it open to a passage in Deuteronomy. And here in Deuteronomy chapter 24, we read these laws right here. This is 24, verse about 20. And you'll see that what God is actually doing, he's actually giving instruction to his people so that the vulnerable in the society would be taken care of. So here's what he says. Oops. He says, when you reap and harvest in the field, and you forget about a sheaf in the field, do not go back and get it, but it shall be for the sojourner. So that's for the outsider. That's for the people who would have been strangers in the land. And then it goes a little further and it says, same thing for the olive trees and the same thing for the grapes of your vineyard. The idea behind all of this is that the laws of charity, or the principles of and the ideas of charity and care for the poor, were actually to be enshrined in the law of Israel. And so what the practice was is that if you have a work crew that was working in the fields and they're going through and they're gathering the grain, but let's say they neglect a section of the land and they don't gather all the grain from there, they were not to then go back and get it. They were to just leave that there. And the same thing, there's another place where it talks about leaving the edge of the field. Don't glean there, don't harvest there, because then what you're actually doing is you're allowing other people to have the opportunity to come and to work for their food. And so what you see here is that the social structure of Israel was put together in such a way that poor and vulnerable people had the opportunity actually to work. Now, what's striking about this is a couple of things. Number one, you see that unlike other cultures and unlike other societies that really took a sort of almost what we would say a Darwinian approach, Israel was God cared so much about caring for the poor that he enshrined it into the law that the people were to make a provision for the poor and for the vulnerable, whether it was the women, the orphan, the sojourner, the outsider, the stranger, the orphan, whoever. The law provided a means by which they would be taken care of. Now, the other part of that, and so that shows you that God's heart really is for the poor and for the vulnerable. But notice the way that God provides for them is not by what we would say today is a handout. It was not simply making sure that it was not simply a way for them to get food or grain without actually having to work for it. So what people were really providing the poor with was an opportunity. It was an opportunity that might not have otherwise been available to them, especially in other cultures and other contexts. It was an opportunity for the dignity of work and for the opportunity for the goodness of labor. And so Jewish law provided care for the vulnerable, but it did not do so in a way that would take away that dignity of work. And so there's sort of this way that God has actually done this. And I think the principle there is something that we ought to pay very close attention to, because I think that principle still very much applies even today. And I think the principle is looking for ways to care for the vulnerable in a way that helps them or provides them with opportunity rather than just with a handout. Now, let me make an appeal to Sunny Slope Church, or maybe use this as an explanation. One of the things that Sunny Slope Church is moving forward with is partnering with a local organization here called Church at the Park. And Church at the Park creates a safe parking program wherein people who are living in their cars and people who are trying to transition back into proper housing, they are given the opportunity to sleep in their cars in a safe place, in a place that's provided with, porta potties and trash collection and security and so on. And Sunny Slope is moving ahead in our partnership with them. And part of the reason that we're doing that is because number one, this isn't just a handout, it's more of an opportunity. It's the opportunity for people who are experiencing homelessness to get the services that they need with the goal of transitioning out of homelessness. So it's not simply an open-ended stay wherever you want as long as you want. It's a program meant to help transition people into long-term care. And so it's not a handout, it's more of an opportunity, and it's created in such a way that there's the structure around this that actually will facilitate that. And so that's why Sunny Slope is participating in this. That's one of the reasons, because it is, God has a concern and a care for the vulnerable in our community and in our society. But that concern is such that the way that you express that concern is through opportunity and help rather than simply a free handout. Now, I think there's other ways that you might apply this. I think there's other ways that a person could actually practice some of these laws and some of these principles. And maybe one of the ways that you do it is you consider your own sphere of influence. You consider the opportunities or the influence and the power that you have. Perhaps it's at work. Perhaps you have the ability to hire certain people. Perhaps you own your own business, and you might begin to ask yourself, how can what leverage can you use? How can you create an opportunity for a vulnerable person in society? And so that might mean that you look for ways to hire a person that another company might be reluctant to hire for various reasons. Now, I'm not suggesting that you should be reckless. I'm not suggesting that you should hire someone unqualified, but I am suggesting that maybe you consider, how could you hire, for example, someone who's transitioning out of incarceration. One of the hardest things, to come out of prison and then to transition back into the general population can be very, very difficult. And so one of the things and if you don't get a job right away, your likelihood of falling back into, crime is very high. And so maybe you have the opportunity to say, I'm going to intentionally hire, at least one person who shows good prospects and good promise of transitioning back into society. And you provide the structure in place, and you put the accountability in place, but you do that in a way that allows them maybe to then be successful. Or I'll give you one more example. Salem for Refugees here in town Right now, they're at sort of a critical need. They have a lot of families that they're providing support for, and these are people who are generally very highly motivated to work and to succeed, but they don't always have, they don't always have the best language skills, for example, but they're very willing to work hard. And so you might consider, well, hiring a person, it's going to be somewhat costly on your part. It's going to require a little more time and effort, but you're creating an opportunity then for a vulnerable person to succeed. And I think that's consistent with these laws of gleaning. I think that's consistent with these biblical principles. That's what God is doing here in Ruth chapter 2. And I think there's a lesson there for us. So that's what gleaning is all about. That's kind of the backbone, or sort of one of the themes in the background of the book of Ruth. And so I thought I'd spend just a little time explaining a little more where those laws come from and what they mean. Thanks for watching, and we'll hopefully see you next time. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on the cutting room floor.